I was ready to catch him cheating. I had proof, or at least, I thought I did. Until I opened that drawer, and everything changed, because what I found wasn't betrayal. It was something I couldn't even explain. I had been watching him for weeks, the late nights, the deleted messages, the way he flinched when his phone buzzed. Every sign was there, or so I believed. I had prepared myself for the worst. I had rehearsed the conversation in my head. I had even decided what I would do next. And then I opened the drawer. What I found wasn't another woman. It was something that made me question everything. Not just about him, but about myself, about our marriage, and about how much we think we know the people we sleep beside every night. Have you ever been completely wrong about someone you love? Drop your story in the comments, or just write "I'm here," so I know you made it to the end. It means everything to me. If this story stayed with you, leave a like. It helps more people find it. I want to start by telling you the kind of woman I was before any of this happened, because I think it matters. I was the kind of woman who trusted easily, not naively. I had been hurt before, in other relationships, in other lives that felt like they belonged to someone younger. But I had learned, or thought I had learned, to trust deliberately. To choose it. To extend it the way you extend your hand to someone and mean it. I trusted my husband, Owen, the way I trusted the ground beneath my feet. Not because I had never thought about it, but because I had thought about it and concluded that the ground was solid, that he was solid, that the life we had built together, 8 years of it, with a mortgage and a dog and a routine so comfortable it had started to feel like a second skin, was built on something real. I was wrong about the cheating. I want to say that now, before we go any further, because the story is not really about that. But I was not wrong about something being hidden. Something was hidden. And what it was, what I found when I finally opened that drawer on a Wednesday evening in October, changed me in ways I am still, honestly, trying to understand. Let me go back to the beginning. It started in September. Or maybe it had started earlier, and I had simply not been paying attention. That particular possibility has kept me up on more than one night since. Owen had always been a private person, not secretive, or so I had thought, just contained. He processed things internally, shared selectively, moved through the world with a kind of deliberate calm that I had always found steadying. He wasn't the kind of man who narrated his feelings. He was the kind of man who showed them sideways, in actions, in the small domestic languages of love that don't get named but get noticed. But in September, something shifted. It was subtle at first, the kind of change that doesn't announce itself, that you feel before you can articulate it. He started staying up after I went to bed. Not every night, but often enough. I would wake at 2 or 3 in the morning and reach for him and find his side of the bed empty and cool, and I would lie there and listen, and eventually I would hear him come upstairs and I would close my eyes and pretend to be asleep because I didn't want to make it a thing. I told myself he had insomnia. I told myself work was stressful. I told myself a lot of things. Then came the phone. Owen had never been particularly attached to his phone. He was the kind of person who left it in another room and forgot about it, who sometimes didn't reply to messages for half a day, not out of rudeness, but out of genuine absence of mind. His relationship with his phone had always been a mild source of teasing between us. I was the one who always had mine, who sent voice memos and remembered to photograph things, who kept our shared calendar updated. He was the one who would lose his phone in his own coat pocket. So when I noticed that he had started keeping it face down on every surface, that he had changed the passcode, I knew because my hand muscle memoried the old one, and the phone didn't open, and that he had started taking it with him to the bathroom, I noticed. I couldn't not notice. It was too different from what I knew. I want to be clear that I did not immediately assume the worst. I went through a period, probably 2 weeks, of constructing alternative explanations. A surprise, something to do with work, something confidential. A gift for me, perhaps. An awkward conversation with a friend that he didn't know how to bring up. I am not a suspicious person by nature, and I worked hard not to become one. But then came the evening I saw the name. We were sitting on the couch after dinner. He had his phone in his hand, tilted slightly away from me, the way you tilt a hand of cards. I wasn't trying to look. I was just there, in the ordinary proximity of a couple who has shared a couch for 8 years, and a message came through and I caught, just a fragment, a name I didn't recognize. Sylvie. No surname. Just Sylvie. And the beginning of a message that ended when he turned the screen further away. I said nothing. I looked at the television, and I said nothing, and something cold and careful settled into my chest and began to make itself at home. Sylvie. I turned the name over in my mind for days. I went through every person I could think of, friends of his I'd met, colleagues I'd heard mentioned, names from his past he'd told me about. No Sylvie. The name belonged to no one I knew. It floated there, unattached, taking on weight simply because of its mystery. I am not proud of what I did next. I have made peace with it, more or less. But I want to be honest because this story deserves honesty. I started watching him the way you watch someone when you no longer trust your own perception of them. Carefully, quietly, taking note of things I would have previously let pass without comment. The Tuesday he came home 40 minutes later than usual. The Thursday he said he had a work call and closed the door of his office, which he had never done before. The way his laugh had become slightly delayed, slightly effortful, the way a person's laugh gets when they are carrying something heavy enough to interrupt reflex. I told myself I was gathering information. I told myself I had a right to know. Both of these things were true, and underneath both of them was the simpler truth. I was afraid. I was afraid that the life I had trusted so completely was built on something that was not what I thought it was, and the fear was making me someone I didn't entirely recognize. By October, I had convinced myself. Not fully, not in the way that removes all doubt, but enough. The way you convince yourself of a diagnosis you've read about online at midnight, with a creeping certainty that you simultaneously hope is wrong. I had decided that when the time was right, I would look. I would find whatever was being hidden because hiding it, whatever it was already a kind of answer. The act of concealment was already a breach of something. I deserved to know what I was living inside. The time came on a Wednesday. Owen had gone to the gym. He went every Wednesday at 7, came back by 9. It was one of the few things in his schedule that had remained entirely unchanged through all of September and October, which made it feel, somehow, like neutral ground. I waited 15 minutes after he left. Then I went to the bedroom. I want to describe the feeling of standing in your own bedroom and feeling like a trespasser in it. The particular wrongness of that. The bedroom was ours. Everything in it was familiar down to the molecules, the blue of the curtains, the stack of books on his nightstand, the slightly uneven way the rug lay because the corner always curled no matter how many times we flattened it. I knew this room. I had slept in it thousands of times. And yet, standing there with the intention of searching it, I felt like I was about to do something that could not be undone. I was right about that part. I started with the nightstand. I don't know what I expected to find. A note, a receipt, a phone I didn't know about. What I found was ordinary. A paperback with a broken spine, some ibuprofen, a charger, a coin from a trip we had taken 3 years ago that he kept because it had a hole through the center, and he thought it was interesting. I held the coin for a moment. It had been a good trip. I moved to the wardrobe. Jacket pockets, mostly empty. A folded receipt from a coffee shop I didn't recognize, dated 6 weeks earlier. My heart did something at the sight of it, and then I turned it over and saw that it was a receipt for 2 coffees and a pastry, and that the total was £9.40, and I thought, that is not the receipt of a man conducting a secret affair. That is the receipt of a man who had coffee with someone and paid for it. People have coffee. and then I opened the bottom drawer. Owen had a drawer on his side of the wardrobe, the bottom one, that I had always treated as his. Not out of any explicit agreement, just out of the natural territory making of long cohabitation, the way couples silently divide space without ever drafting the map. It was his drawer. I kept my things on my side. I hadn't opened his bottom drawer since the first year we lived together, when I had put away some of his laundry before I understood that he preferred to do it himself. I opened it, and I stood there, looking at what was inside, for a very long time. It was not what I expected. There was no second phone, no letters, no evidence of another woman, another life, another self existing in parallel with the one I knew. What there was, what filled that drawer with a quiet that felt almost accusatory, was paper. Notebooks. At least 8 of them, maybe 10, stacked and worn and filled. And alongside them, loose sheets folded into careful squares. And in the back corner, a small box that I recognized. It had been a gift box for something else, years ago, now repurposed. And inside the box, folded so many times they had become dense little rectangles, were more pages still. I picked up the nearest notebook. It was one of those cheap ones, the kind with the black and white marbled cover. His name was not on it. Nothing was on the outside. I opened it, and I started to read. It was writing. Owen's writing. I knew his handwriting immediately. The particular architecture of his lowercase letters, the way his 7s always had a crossbar, the way his capital I always leaned slightly to the right. His writing? Everywhere, filling every page in that careful, dense way of someone who has been writing for a long time, who is not performing, but recording. It took me several minutes to understand what I was reading. Not fiction. Not a diary exactly. Not in the confessional way I might have expected. Not a recounting of events or feelings in simple sequential form. What it was, what I slowly understood it to be, was something more complicated. Part memoir, part observation. Part something I didn't have a clean word for. The kind of writing that happens when someone is trying to work something out, and writing is the only tool they trust enough to use. He had been writing about his childhood. I knew the broad outlines of Owen's childhood. I knew that it had not been easy, that his father had been a difficult man, unpredictable in ways that had taken Owen years to name clearly, that he had grown up in a state of managed alertness that had become so habitual he'd carried it into adulthood without recognizing it until therapy, years ago, gently pointed at it. I knew these things because he had told me them. Not all at once, not dramatically, but over time, in the sideways way he shared things. What I had not known was the depth of it. What I held in my hands was the depth of it. Page after page of memory written out with a precision that made me ache. Not sensationalized, not the kind of writing that performs suffering for an audience. The kind that is almost clinical in its honesty, that describes things with an accuracy more devastating than any embellishment could achieve. Small things, the way he had learned to read his father's footsteps on the stairs. The specific way dinner time felt when the tension in a room was so thick it changed the taste of food. The conversations he had rehearsed in his head as a child, practicing how to answer questions in ways that would not set something off, how to make himself smaller, quieter, less of a presence. He had been writing, I could tell from the dates scattered through the notebooks, for years, long before I met him. Since his early 20s, maybe earlier. Writing as a way of making sense of something that had never fully made sense. Writing because it was, perhaps, the only place he felt entirely safe to be the full size of what he had lived through. And he had never told me. Not in these terms. Not in this depth. I sat down on the floor of our bedroom. I don't remember deciding to sit. My legs simply made the decision for me. And I read for a long time. I don't know how long. The light in the room changed. I read until I heard his key in the front door, and then I sat very still and listened to him take off his shoes in the hallway and call my name, and when I didn't answer, come up the stairs. He stopped in the doorway. He saw me on the floor. He saw the open drawer. He saw the notebook in my hands. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the room, in that terrible open silence that exists before a conversation that has no comfortable shape. Then he came in. He sat down on the floor, too, a few feet away from me. Not beside me. Not across from me. Just also on the floor, in a posture that matched mine without mirroring it. Two people being equally undone in the same space. "I found these," I said, uselessly. "I see that. Why didn't you tell me?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the evasive quiet, not the careful, strategic silence I had spent the past weeks bracing against. A different kind. A quiet that came from somewhere real and tired. "I don't know how to talk about it," he said. "I never have. Writing it is different. Writing it I can." He stopped. "When I write it, I can see it clearly. When I try to say it out loud, it just becomes sound. It loses its edges. I can't hold it properly." I looked down at the notebook in my hands. "How long?" "Since I was 22, maybe earlier. There are some things I wrote by hand before I had a computer, and then I transcribed them and—" He stopped himself. "It doesn't matter. A long time. And you didn't want me to know. It wasn't—" He pressed a hand briefly over his mouth, the way he did when he was trying to find exact language. "It wasn't that I didn't want you to know. It was that I didn't know how to bring you in. It felt like too much to hand to someone else. Like it would only ever mean something to me." I thought about the weeks I had spent watching him. The name Sylvie surfacing and sinking in my imagination. The stories I had constructed. The evidence I had assembled. The fear that had quietly reorganized my interior life. "I thought you were having an affair," I said. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something between disbelief and a deep, exhausted sadness. "I know," he said. I stared at him. "You knew?" I could tell something had changed. The way you were looking at me. I didn't know exactly what you thought, but I could feel that you had concluded something about me. He looked down. I didn't know how to correct it without explaining everything, and I wasn't ready to explain everything. I held the notebook in both hands and felt the weight of it, the specific physical weight of 10 years of a person's inner life. "Who is Sylvie?" I asked. Something passed across his face, surprise first, then something that might have been the beginning of a small, sad smile. "My therapist," he said. "I started seeing her in September. She's the one she encouraged me to go back to the writing. I'd stopped for a long time. She thought it would help." Sylvie, his therapist. On the couch beside me, receiving messages, turning the screen. The entire architecture of my fear had been built on absolutely nothing real, and at the same time, on something more real than what I'd feared. Because what was in those notebooks was not betrayal. It was something harder to hold than betrayal. It was the interior life of the person I loved, the full, private, unglamorous, unsimplified interior life. And I had not been let into it. Not because I was not trusted exactly, but because some rooms in a person are so old and so closely held that even love does not automatically open the door. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." "Do you want to talk about it? Not all of it. Not right now, but eventually. Do you want that, or is this—" I held up the notebook. "Is this all there is? This and the page?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought he might not answer. "I think I want to try," he said at last. "I don't know how to do it well yet, but I think I want to try." We sat on the floor of our bedroom for a long time after that. Eventually the dog came in and wedged himself between us, because that is what dogs do, and we both put a hand on him without thinking, and Owen looked at me over the dog's back and said, "I'm sorry you were scared." And I said, "I'm sorry I didn't ask you instead of watching you," and neither of those apologies fixed everything, but they were true, and truth is where you have to start. In the months that followed, I learned things about my husband that I could not have predicted. I learned that he had been in therapy on and off since his mid-20s, that the notebooks were not evidence of crisis but evidence of maintenance, of someone who had decided to tend to himself, quietly and privately, as a matter of ongoing practice. I learned that the writing was, for him, not darkness, but relief. That the act of setting things down on paper had for years been the thing that kept the past from flooding the present. I read more of the notebooks. Not all of them. Some he asked me not to read yet, and I respected that, because respecting the boundaries of someone's inner life is part of loving them. But enough to understand that I had been living beside someone whose depths I had substantially underestimated. Not because he had deceived me, but because I had assumed that what was visible was what was there. It is a strange thing to fall in love with your husband twice. But I think that is what happened. The first time was gradual, the slow accumulation of ordinary days, the building of trust, the settling into each other. The second time was more abrupt, more uncomfortable, more real. It happened on the floor of our bedroom on a Wednesday evening in October, with a marbled notebook in my lap and a dog between us and 8 years of ordinary life behind us and whatever came next ahead. I had been so ready to find proof of betrayal. I had found something that required much more of me than betrayal would have. It would have been simpler, in a strange way, to have found evidence of an affair. Simpler and more terrible, yes, but comprehensible. There is a script for that. There are established responses, established roles, established ways of moving through it. What I found instead had no script. What I found instead was the reminder that the people we love are never entirely knowable, that intimacy is not the same as access, and that there will always be parts of another person that exist at a depth language barely reaches, parts they may be spending their whole lives trying to understand themselves. What do you do with that? You do what we did. You sit on the floor. You let the dog come between you. You say the imperfect true thing instead of the polished almost thing. You go back to the beginning, not of the relationship, but of the conversation, the one you should have been having all along, the one that required more courage than either of you fully had, the one you start having now, even if now is late, even if it is messy, even if you have no idea how to do it well. Owen still writes. He goes to Sylvie every 2 weeks. He has started occasionally reading me things. Not all of it, not the oldest and most private pieces, but some. He reads in a voice that is slightly different from his speaking voice, lower and more careful. And I listen, and I do not try to fix what I hear, because it is not broken. It is just true. And truth does not need to be fixed. It needs to be witnessed. I still think about the weeks I spent watching him. The way suspicion had reshaped my perception so completely that I had stopped seeing him and started seeing only the evidence I was looking for. The way fear, when you let it run the whole show, will find what it needs to confirm itself. I had looked at my husband and seen a stranger with a secret. And he was a stranger with a secret, just not the one I'd written for him. There is something I carry with me now that I did not have before that Wednesday. It is not a comfortable thing to carry. It is the knowledge that I do not know, fully, the person I love, that no one fully knows the person they love, and that this is not a failure of love, but a feature of it. That the space between people, even people who choose each other daily, even people who sleep in the same bed and share a dog and know each other's coffee orders and complete each other's sentences, that space does not disappear with time. It changes. It becomes more familiar. But it remains. And learning to stand in that space without fearing it. Learning to understand that the unknown parts of the people we love are not threats, but invitations. That I think is one of the longer projects of loving someone. I am still working on it. We both are. If you have stayed with me until the end of this, thank you. Thank you for being here while I tried to make sense of something that I am still, honestly, making sense of. If any of this felt familiar to you, the watching, the fearing, the discovering that the truth was stranger and harder and more beautiful than the lie you'd prepared yourself for, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment. Tell me your story. Or just write, "I'm here." That is enough. That has always been enough. Fine. Have you ever been completely wrong about someone you love? Drop your story in the comments, or just write, "I'm here," so I know you made it to the end. It means everything to me. If this story stayed with you, leave a like. It helps more people find it.